Professor Dame Alison Peacock is Chief Executive of the Chartered College of Teaching, which works to promote the status of teaching by celebrating, supporting and connecting teachers with an aim to enhance education practice. Prior to joining the Chartered College, Dame Alison was Executive Head Teacher of the Wroxham School in Hertfordshire. Her career to date has spanned primary, secondary and advisory roles. She's an Honorary Fellow of Queen's College, Cambridge, and a visiting Professor of both the University of Hertfordshire and Glyndŵr University. Her research is published in a series of books about learning without limits, offering an alternative approach to inclusive school improvement. Welcome, Alison, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Dom. I hope someone's going to start my video and share my slides, because at the minute I'm talking into...
I think we're on it. Yeah, we're on it.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start talking because my time is very limited while we're just waiting for the slides and the video. Essentially, the notion of pupil voice is fundamental to everything that I've done as a head teacher and in my career, and now working with the Chartered College of Teaching, recognizing that pupil voice and agency is not possible unless we have teacher agency. And so I'm going to be sharing with you my feelings about all of this. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is Claudia, and many of you will have heard me speaking about Claudia before. This was a little girl that I worked with many years ago. She actually was unable to speak, so she literally had no voice, and she had no agency within the school where she was being educated at the time that I joined, because one, she hadn't got a voice, but also her teaching assistant, Maria, was Spanish. She wasn't valued in the school. She wasn't allowed in the staff room. So the whole kind of, if you like, this example is a sort of microcosm of what goes wrong when we fail to listen. What happened when I began to work with her, she had her own teacher. She began to get really excited about that. She was just a wonderful child to work with, was that she learned to read. And ultimately, as you can see here from this photograph, she learned to walk. And this is, for me, the embodiment of what happens when a teacher believes in the art of the possible, when a teacher works in collaboration with the child through co-agency, the teaching assistant as well, all of us working together to lift limits on what was possible for Claudia. If I can have the next slide, please. So I've been involved in research with colleagues from the University of Cambridge, writing about this notion of learning without limits. What happens when we enable trust, co-agency and inclusion to be at the heart of the teaching process, which means that we stop thinking about so-called ability, we stop thinking about how we label children, and instead we think about what might become possible to transform learning capacity. If we can move on to the next slide, thank you. This slide talks about the factors involved in transforming learning capacity, which therefore enhance the capacity to learn. And we think about how we need to act to lift some of the limits that are externally imposed upon teachers. Some of these are real limits, some of these are perceived limits, but they are limits that stop us too often from taking the time to listen. So the notion of co-agency is where teachers and children work together for change, where everybody's voice counts, where everybody works together to enact a curriculum that is meaningful. And when I say everybody, this was central to the Learning Without Limits ethos. It's not the convenient majority, it's all children. And in order to do that, we need to work in a climate of trust. If I can take the next slide, please. So essentially, this is about how do we work together to shift the culture. In England, particularly, we have a very deterministic view of learning, a very deterministic view often of lots of aspects of life related to the class system and ways in which we believe we ought to just know our place. And I'm talking about really shifting the culture of knowing your place and not getting above yourself, to saying, actually, all children deserve to be in a classroom, in a learning environment where the art of the possible is at the forefront. So if I can have the next slide. I became a head teacher. I used to talk about my first headship, and I realised it's my only headship of a primary school. And I was there for very many years. When I went to that school, it was in a category, it was a failing school, it was in special measures. And when I arrived at the school, I said to the children and the teachers and the governors, anybody who else would listen to me, that we were going to create a listening school. I'd learned from children like Claudia about the power of listening. And this is not just listening to voices, this is listening to behaviours. And sometimes, you know, children who turn away from you are telling you something very powerful, as well as the ones who talk very articulately to you. So I began to lead that school, and we can have the next slide, please. On my first day, I led an assembly of the children who'd been described by Ofsted as being unteachable and shared with them this picture book. Some of you may know it, The Huge Bag of Worries. And the picture book essentially is all about a child who's laden down with a bag full of worries, and he meets an old lady and she takes some of the worries out of the bag, and then everybody feels better. And I sort of read this book to the children, and I closed the book, and then I said to them, the thing is, I'm a bit worried. I've never been a head teacher before. And you can see the staff around the edge of the hall like, oh, for goodness sake. But the children were kind of listening intently, and I turned and I'd got a bag on my shoulder, and in that bag I'd got lots of worries, typed worries, laminated worries. I am a professional. Anyway, and one of the children put her hand up and she said, well, Mrs. Peacock, maybe we could come and take the worries out of your worry bag. And this was the start of a whole journey of, this is about all of us, a collective endeavour. So that's what happened. Some of the worries the children read out and sort of said, well, this is what you can do. And I remember one particular worry, which was, supposing everybody expects me to know what to do and I don't know the answers. And the child who read this one out said, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that. See over there, that's Mrs. Todd. She knows everything. And this was a teacher who'd been through the whole process of the school being in special measures. Here was a child at the front of the hall with the new head teacher saying, turn to Mrs. Todd, she knows everything. So essentially, this is about, not about hero headship in any way, it's about a collective endeavour, all of us together, the children, the teachers, the parents, the governors, the wider community. What can we do when we all have a sense of agency about how we improve our school? So we can have the next slide, please. This is about building, for me, it was about building democratic engagement. I'd worked with the likes of Professor Michael Fielding, I'd worked with many people who were very inspiring to me in the field of, Jean Rudduck being another, in the field of democratic engagement and the importance of voice and agency. We started whole school mixed age circle groups, initially led by the teachers, but ultimately led by the children, with the teachers joining in as equal members of those groups. This led, if I can have the next slide, to a climate of trust, which is fundamentally important, with the reciprocity of teachers and children trusting each other, that mutual reciprocity really vital here. And this particular picture is a picture of a week where the year sixes explored graffiti art. If you ever want a symbolism of a primary teacher trusting their students, it's engaging graffiti artists with youngsters with spray cans. We can have the next slide, please. Fundamentally, this is about how do we work with every child, not just the convenient children, every child to find a way through. How do we find a way through to enable them to learn? Well, I believe we do this through looking at the curriculum in a different way, if we can have the next slide. So it is about making sure that we take notice of the affective dispositions, that we make sure that with persistence that we have the courage and humility not to settle for easy answers, and that we have the courage not to just seek the simple solution and reject complexity. That we need emotional stability where we take risks together with our students, our children, and we're able to resist the kinds of pressures that may make us feel that failure is something that stops us from trying anything new. So when we talk about children making mistakes, we need to model all of this together. This is not just about you make a mistake and it's all right. All of us together, that making sure that we have the emotional stability. Thank you. If I can have the next slide. The next dispositions are ones of generosity and empathy. Following the disruption of the pandemic, the socialization of our children, being able to connect is vitally important, listening to what they say. The voices of young people were completely silent pretty much during the pandemic, particularly at the beginning. We just didn't see them in the media, we didn't see them anywhere. So that sense of being able to welcome difference, making sure that we have a climate of mutual supportiveness, all of these aspects of a culture enable the agency to flourish of everybody in the community, the children and the adults, fundamental. If I can have the next slide, thank you. And of course, the intellectual domain is really important when we're thinking about education, but it's not everything. And in order for the intellectual domain to flourish, we need openness, we need questioning, we need inventiveness. We need to be open to children surprising us, to young people surprising us. As soon as we think as educators that we've got all the answers and that we can track the outcomes of what we're doing, from my point of view, we're doomed. So the academic freedom that our teachers need is fundamental to this. We need not to be just following tick lists and making sure that we're looking over our shoulder the whole time to worry about what someone else thinks. We need to be open to ideas, fundamental. And to do that, we need to have a questioning disposition. We need to celebrate inventiveness, to give creative responses to challenges. Because otherwise, when children come to you with ideas, you're going to close them down. And the whole point of this is about how we celebrate and work together to find things that have not been discovered before. So moving on, if I can have the next slide. Sorry, I'm racing through this because of the time available. So this is a picture that initially on first glance looks rather unprepossessing, really, doesn't it? It's a picture that was sent to me by a professor in the States. It's from a 7-year-old child, and I remember looking at it and thinking, well, what's this all about then? But with it is some dialogue from a child and her teacher. So here is 7-year-old Clammerly talking to her teacher about this picture. The teacher says, "What's going on in this story, Clammerly? In my world, I read books and think." And what is it a picture of? Two people are thinking the same book about the same pig, but it doesn't have the same title, but it has the same pig. But the pig is just standing up at the sun, and the other one is, I think it's eating food at the farm. The two people are happy because they always wanted to have the same book and the same brain connected. Teacher, the same brain connected. So what are they holding in their hands? Books. Those are the books themselves. Are they reading together or talking about books? Thinking. How are they connecting their two brains? By reading the same books about pigs. How did you get an idea for making this? Is it a picture or a story? Story. It's a story. And are the two people sharing? They're sharing their brains while they're thinking it. The two brains are being shared. How does that happen? By connecting books and brains. Do you like connecting books and brains? Kind of. Why? Because I love reading. Reading is important in your life, and your brain likes books. So what we're hearing here from this dialogue between the teacher and the child is that the child has understood that when I read a book and you read a book and it's about the same character but they're different titles, we have a shared experience in common. Our brains are being connected. This is a 7-year-old. Now, had the dialogue not taken place, and this is so often in classrooms, children produce work, teachers look at the outcome. Of course they do. They've got lots and lots of children to work with. But if we never understand and never ask and never take the opportunity to listen, we miss the kind of insights that I've just shared that Clammerly is talking about here with her teacher. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So in our school, we tried really hard to make sure that children's voice and agency, the ways that they contributed to the curriculum design, the way that they were learning in classrooms and sharing their ideas was also translated to feedback to families. And we had learning review meetings twice a year instead of parent consultations. And these were meetings where the children would present their learning to their families. The families loved this because almost always they were delighted and overwhelmed by the quality of what the children were able to show them. The teacher was present, I was present. We were able to also talk about what else we needed to do collectively, all of the adults, to support the child's learning, because the child is the most important person in the room. This is not about wait until parents' evening and I'll tell your mum what you've been up to. This was about how do we all work together. And those children who found learning challenging at times, they may well have been swiveling round and round and round on my swivel chair in my office while we were talking. The kind of issues that they experienced were issues that all of us needed to help them with, not ones they needed to be blamed for. So again, really powerful way of bringing families into the conversation. And over the last year, families, of course, have seen so much more about what their children are doing in school, and where children have had a sense of agency about their own learning and maybe developed that even further because they've been working at a distance from school. This is something I believe we really need to capture and to make the most of. And just to move on to the final slide, if I may, we also were very keen to hear the voice of the child when we were writing a document at the end of the year to celebrate the learning that had taken place. These were written by children electronically, and then teachers came in and had a conversation with the children electronically in terms of what had been going on in their learning. The parents, again, families were very appreciative because they could hear their voice of their child through the documentation. So fundamental to all of this is about a genuine sense of partnership, genuine sense of, we have a curriculum, we have lots of guidance within our school about what we are expected to teach. How best to do this? Well, from my point of view, if we do this without involving the children, we miss such a trick, because the children need to be active partners in the process. So when it comes to self-assessment, when it comes to formative review, when it comes to any aspect of the curriculum, not to involve the child feels to me to be, I don't know, to be standing on one leg in terms of what might be possible. I've now moved from being a head teacher to leading the Chartered College of Teaching, and everything that I'm about and everything that the Chartered College of Teaching is about hearing the voice of every teacher, enabling the teacher to be able to be academically free and enabled to be the best version of themselves they can be, and to respond in the best possible way they can to their students, and to collaborate across the system. So I'm very keen that the work that we started with Learning Without Limits translates itself into, in a sense, professional learning without limits for teachers, for all colleagues working in schools, to enable the freedom I've described for the children working with them. Thank you very much indeed, Dom. I've managed to whiz through that, and it's only 10:44.
Thank you, and sorry the time got compressed, but wonderful. I've got so many things that I'd love to talk to you about, but I want to give that time for, we've already got questions coming in. So a relatively quick one, I think, is from Helen Jones, who says, Alison, that was a fantastic transcript of the children talking about reading, connecting our brains. Can I read a copy somewhere?
Yes, I can actually make that available to you, Dom, and maybe that can be sent out to delegates. Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then another issue raised by Ibrahim Talay. How can we consider children's voice and choice at the intended curriculum level, particularly in centralised systems like the Iranian education system, where nearly all parts of the curriculum are predefined by curriculum specialists and similar textbooks are used all over the country? Thank you.
That's it. Give me a nice, easy question. I mean, I think the reality is, however constrained the curriculum, however constrained the school, there is always a room in the margins to make sure that you are, as a teacher, showing that you value your youngsters, that you value their contribution, that you value their voice. And so even the tiniest things show appreciation from the teacher to the student. And I mean, obviously in England, in fact, although we feel constrained, we do have a tremendous amount of freedom to be able to do these things. And yet there are many schools who feel as though, sorry, we haven't got time to listen to you because I've got my curriculum to cover. And I think the whole point of what we're doing today is to show that that diagram I shared absolutely, for me, really enhances the whole notion that you extend the capacity of children's learning when you engage them in the process, as opposed to just doing to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that this is where international collaboration is so important, isn't it? That we can try and share and work together to help each other to try and push forward in favour of children's agency, rights, and so on. And admittedly, it's a demanding task, and it varies hugely depending on the cultural and political context, obviously. But I agree with you about England, and what your wonderful work on Learning Without Limits reminded me, and your mention of Jean Rudduck, was we must know what's been done before and has worked, so we can generate genuinely new knowledge and new practice based on what people like you have done. And that's always a challenge because there's so much out there. But also, it's like, you know, Michelle's colleagues, where it is possible, isn't it? On the one hand, you know, we can see some limitations in England's national curriculum. We can see some constraints, but some schools are doing incredible things in spite of, or as well as, you know. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Look, Alison, it's so wonderful as ever to hear you talk. Inspirational ideas that you know will stand the test of time. So thank you so much. Thank you. We've got questions piling up, which hopefully we'll bring into other slots. For now, Alison, thanks, and see you soon. Because I'm going to move on now to our next keynote speaker, which is Professor Sue Rogers.